All right, so onboarding, let's get into the way not to do it. The incorrect approach. I'm sorry to say that what I'm about to show you here is the way that most companies onboard. And this is the experience that most people have in corporate America, and we suffer from it. So this is what the process looks like. Here you have a series of months, 1 to 7 months, in which, of course, you're hoping that folks perform really well in the early part of these months, and they stay long lasting. That's our goal. On the left-hand side, we show their level of contribution, what they offer to the table, what they bring to the table to grow and become a high-performing individual. All right, so let's give ourselves here a 3-month approach. This is what we mostly do. We say, all right, we want somebody to perform by the end of the 3 months, and 3 months, that's what we call their testing period. And most companies have a 90-day period in which we can say whether they really are keepers or not. And there's a lot of legal ramifications around it. So what I'm asking you to do is don't worry about the legal ramifications. Change the way you look at this from a management approach. All right, so the approach basically says that we're going to set a goal for them to become high performance players. We're going to do them some initial training, whether it's a day, 2 days, perhaps a week. That's good. It should happen. And then we're going to expect them and motivate them to start performing, okay, and to really get with us for anything we're available for them. And 2 months later, we'll hopefully they'll be growing so that by the end of the 3rd month, they have become good performers. Okay, the reality of this is that although we want them to stay high performing after that, 25, like we said, 28% of them quit during this process. And the reality also is Gallup, even to this day, shows that the remaining, all other employees stay disengaged at a 70% level. That means that they're only really engaged 30% of the time. So this process in America has not produced the high performing teams that we want. And the primary reasons for this is that this process places the responsibility for growth mostly on the employee and not on the company. I mean, be true to yourselves. Be honest with yourselves. You know that we tend to hire people with this approach, and we want them to be high performance from the moment they come in, and then we just tell them, hey, you know how to do your job, and we say, here, we throw them in, and we expect them to be able to grow. Then the second reason why this process does not work is because it doesn't provide any support. It doesn't provide regular feedback, and it doesn't really set clear expectations of anyone following up on performance. It just doesn't provide that. And something else is that this onboarding process does not attract great candidates. The word about how you bring on candidates does not get out into the community, and you just become just like everybody else. But if you change your approach to make it more exciting, the word gets out and people actually will line up and be willing to last longer in your pipeline. And they'll call you back because they understand how powerful of a process you had, and it will attract more candidates. Also, this process does not produce high-performing teams. It just isn't. All statistics show 28% quit, and all of the remaining employees stay engaged only 30% of the time. All right, so how do we set up a good onboarding process? All right, so what I'm going to ask you to do is, again, to change the way you look at things and look at it in this way. We're going to still use the basic structure of what we have explained up to this point. They offer a certain level of contribution on the left. You have the 7 months down at the bottom. You're going to do some initial training. We'll cover a little later there. But other than that, from what I want to show you is very different. This is the approach we want you to have, is for you to recognize that there's 4 phases in this process. There's a phase where you do recruiting, the phase when the arrival happens and you do some initial training. Then the phase 3 is where you're going to develop them and you're going to mentor them. And then there's a later phase, which we'll cover in the back part of this webinar. But the first 3 phases are the ones we will have to pay most attention to. And today we're going to spend the vast majority of our time on phase 3. Why? Covey says that it's really good for you to start from the end backwards. So we're going to coach you and train you here on how to understand phase 3 so that you'll know how to set up phase 1 and phase 2. So in phase 3, what you do is you set up you look at the expectations that you had previously when you were doing the previous approach, the previous process, and you say, no, you know what? I should be able to raise a higher standard of performance so that my team members aren't starting from a lower level of performance for 3 months. I want them to be higher performance team members after the 6 and 7 month, because I want them to grow after that. So the threshold that I want to get them to is very high. You should expect a lot from this process. You're going to expect a lot of them from this process, and you're going to expect a lot from your managers in this process. And that's where you have all 3 team members working together, the HR department or your HR person, your recruiting person, then your managers, and then the person themselves. All 3 players have to understand the demands and the disciplines of the process. All right, so something I want you to also notice is that what's different is that whereas most people think that onboarding is when they first arrive, others think that onboarding means the first week. Some people think that onboarding is really the first 3 months. What we're saying is no, onboarding is the first 6 months. And if you can do what we're going to show you today in the first 6 months, then phase 4 becomes even more possible because they've learned how to do it themselves. And you've trained them to do it themselves to where they can grow in phase 4 and be much more self-developing performers. All right, so the next thing I'm going to ask you to change the way to think is, instead of expecting folks to come in contributing a whole lot, you need to view and understand that they're all team members. It doesn't matter how good they are on paper or how much experience they've had. Everybody comes in with a deficit. They come in below the contribution line, close to the bottom, because they don't have a lot to offer in regards to learning your culture, figuring things out, and learning what it means to be successful. They may know how to do their particular technical skills, but that's probably not what's going to make them suffer. What's going to make them suffer is your culture, figuring you out, figuring your team out, the relationships with others, and then how is it that success is measured here, and how do I become part of this team? That's where people have to do a lot of climbing out of this hole, and they have to climb their way. And all statistics, and in that book, The First 90 Days, it points out that it takes any given employee, doesn't matter the profession, any given employee, new candidate, 3 months just to get out of that hole and start contributing. During that process, okay, the new red line I showed you there is most of us, we pretty much stop the development or the training of them at that point. But the new way I want you to look at this is that the blue line that just popped up on your screen, that shows that throughout the entire 3 months, there needs to be a weekly oversight and a weekly coaching by the managers. At this point, you're sitting going, wait a minute, a weekly? Are you serious? Yes, I'm serious. We'll talk about how to do that properly so that it doesn't kill your time and yet you can become effective. But if this doesn't happen, you're going to have the same results as the previous process. All right, so when you're providing this and you get them to the first 3 months, they're just now getting to where they're contributing, all right? Then you want to continue the same approach of weekly oversight and coaching for the next 3 months, so that by the time they get to between the 6 and 7 month, you have a high performance team member. And the way to do that is to secure that the manager is doing the regular oversight and coaching, or the frontline supervisor, whoever the frontline manager or the frontline supervisor or the frontline team leader is overseeing the performance of that team member. That person has to stay engaged on a regular basis, overseeing, providing coaching, providing management, and don't wait for there to be just a review at 3 months, and then we're going to do a performance review 6 months later. That does not work, okay? So I want to tell you that in order to do this, you have to have what's called a handoff.